The Ashworth mansion stood like a fortress of glass and marble at the edge of the cliffs, its towering walls gleaming in the early morning light. To outsiders, it was the picture of success, a palace of wealth, luxury, and power. But to the man who owned it, Alexander Ashworth, it was nothing more than a well-decorated cage. Alexander had inherited millions, expanded it into billions, and yet he had never known peace. Every smile he had trusted had turned to betrayal. His ex-wife had walked away with half his fortune in a divorce that felt more like a corporate raid than the end of love. Former business partners had siphoned money through secret accounts. Even employees he once called friends had stolen from him. Over time, Alexander had built invisible walls around himself, stronger than the steel vaults in his mansion, walls no one could breach. And then came Camilla. She had arrived quietly 7 months ago, a maid recommended by an old housekeeper who swore she was the kind you can trust. Alexander hadn't believed that. He didn't believe anyone could be trusted. Yet from the first morning she walked through his doors, Camilla had been different. Slender, reserved, with dark hair always tied back in a neat bun, she moved through the mansion like a ghost of quiet discipline. She never lingered. She never flattered. She never even looked at the expensive things surrounding her, as if they didn't exist. She had a clean background, spotless references, and an unshakable work ethic. And somehow that made Alexander more suspicious, not less. No one was this perfect. No one could work in a house dripping with diamonds and gold and not be tempted. Every morning he watched her from a distance. He saw her dust priceless vases with the same care she used on window ledges. He saw her leave exactly on time, not a minute early or late. She lived as if under an invisible weight. Silent, focused, contained. Alexander felt something he hadn't felt in years: curiosity. Who was this woman who seemed immune to the poison of greed that had infected everyone else in his life? And more dangerously, why was her honesty starting to feel threatening? That was when the idea took root: cold, sharp, and merciless. If no one could be trusted, he would prove it. Alexander Ashworth had always believed that people revealed their true nature when temptation whispered louder than their conscience. For years he had been burned by smiling faces and false promises. He told himself that trust was a luxury only fools could afford. And yet something about Camilla's quiet presence gnawed at him. It wasn't affection. Not yet. It was suspicion. She was too perfect. Too calm. Too clean. He told himself. It was only logical to verify her loyalty before she became another name on his long list of disappointments. But deep inside he knew this wasn't logic. It was fear. Fear that maybe someone good had entered his world, and that his broken heart wouldn't know how to handle goodness without destroying it. So he designed the test. It was cruel, calculated, and cold. At exactly 8:30 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, he walked into his private study. The room smelled faintly of old books and polished oak. A massive crystal chandelier hung above, scattering fractured light across the marble floor. In the far corner, the steel safe stood like a silent guardian, usually sealed tight, armed with biometric locks and laser sensors. But not today. Today the safe stood wide open. Inside, bundles of crisp $100 bills were stacked like green bricks of temptation. Golden chains and heirloom diamond necklaces glittered under the warm light. Each item was worth more than Camilla could make in 5 lifetimes. Alexander had instructed his security team to disable the hallway cameras for exactly 30 minutes. He dismissed the household staff for the morning, claiming he had business meetings. And then he hid, just beyond the archway leading to the study, where he could see her without being seen. He knew her schedule. She would come at precisely 8:42 a.m. to dust the study, just like she always did. He stood in the shadows, heart drumming with anticipation. Would she falter? Would she steal? Or would she prove once and for all that trust was a lie? At 8:42 sharp, the door creaked softly. Camilla stepped in wearing her simple gray uniform, her hair tied back in its usual bun. She held a feather duster loosely in one gloved hand, her posture straight, yet unassuming. At first, she didn't notice the safe. She hummed faintly under, her breath moving to the shelves, dusting the leather spines of antique books. Alexander's heartbeat hammered in his ears. Then the sunlight shifted through the tall window, landing directly on the open vault. The steel glinted like a blade. Camilla froze. Her duster stopped midair. Her eyes locked on the safe. For a moment, she didn't breathe. Alexander leaned forward slightly, watching every twitch, every flicker across her face. Her gaze flicked to the doorway. Silence. No one there. She took a hesitant step forward. Alexander's pulse surged. This was it. Camilla moved closer, each footstep soundless on the marble. When she reached the safe, her fingers hovered just over the stacks of cash, trembling not with greed, but with something softer, something heavier. And then, she didn't take anything. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a small, worn photograph. Two smiling little girls, maybe 7 and 5, stood in front of a hospital bed where an older woman lay smiling weakly. Camilla stared at the photo for a long moment, her lips trembling. Then she kissed it softly, placed it back in her pocket, and began cleaning the edge of the safe. Gently, carefully, without shifting a single bill. Alexander's breath caught. His chest tightened in a way that felt almost painful. She wasn't resisting temptation. She simply wasn't tempted at all. Alexander stood frozen in the shadowed hallway, the weight of what he was seeing pressing against his chest like an invisible hand. He had imagined this moment 100 different ways. In all of them, Camilla reached out. Maybe just one bill, maybe a handful of diamonds. Maybe she would hesitate and walk away, her conscience visibly battling her desperation. That, he thought, would have been understandable, human, predictable. But this was something else entirely. Camilla's hands didn't even graze the money. Instead, she moved like someone performing a quiet ritual, wiping away invisible dust from the steel edges of the safe with the same gentle care she gave the silver frames and marble counters each morning. Her face held no hunger, no gleam of greed, only that calm, contained sadness that had always lived in her eyes. Then, the photograph. Alexander's heart lurched when he saw it. 2 little girls beaming, full of life, framed by the pale hospital smile of an older woman lying behind them. There was a history there, sealed in the creases of the photo. Struggle, love, loss. Camilla held the photo as if it were more valuable than every treasure in the vault. She glanced around once, as though afraid the walls themselves might judge. Her tenderness then bent her head and kissed the photo softly like a prayer. Her lips trembled faintly. For a brief second, her composure cracked, and Alexander saw the raw weight she carried behind her quiet obedience. Then she tucked the photo back into her pocket, closed the safe with deliberate care, and exhaled quietly, before returning to her duties as if nothing had ever happened. Alexander remained where he was, unable to move. Something hot and stinging blurred his vision. He had not cried in years, not when his father died, not when his wife walked out, not even when his best friend stole millions from him. But now, in the silence of his own mansion, watching a maid dust his furniture, tears burned at the corners of his eyes. It wasn't guilt alone that pierced him. It was shame, because for the first time in years he realized the extent of what he had become. He had turned suspicion into a religion. He had made trust an enemy. He had looked at every person through the cracked lens of his own pain and assumed they were broken too. He had seen Camilla's silence and mistaken it for secrecy. Her discipline he had labeled coldness. Her endurance he had called ambition. And all the while, she was simply surviving. Alexander's legs felt unsteady as he stepped back, deeper, into the hallway shadows before she could catch a glimpse of him. His breath came shallow. He needed to get out, to think, to make sense of this strange, shattering ache in his chest. He walked away quietly, the sound of his own heartbeat pounding louder than his footsteps. That night, Alexander didn't sleep. He lay in his vast empty bed staring at the carved ceiling, the image of Camilla's trembling smile etched behind his eyelids. He kept hearing the faint sound of her whisper to the photo, the words he couldn't catch. He saw her daughter's bright faces and the fragile strength in her shoulders. He thought about the cancer-stricken woman in the bed, and how Camilla must have been holding her whole world together with invisible threads while still showing up to polish someone else's marble floors. And she had walked away from a fortune, untouched. The test had not exposed Camilla, it had exposed him. By morning, Alexander felt like a man who had woken up in someone else's life. The house was the same, marble halls, chandeliers, the faint lemon polish smell that lingered on every surface, but he wasn't. Something had shifted, quietly and permanently in the night. He couldn't shake the image of Camilla kissing that photograph. It replayed on an endless loop in his mind, more vivid than any memory of his own childhood, more haunting than the betrayals that had shaped him. For decades, Alexander had been a fortress. Walls of stone, locks of steel, a heart barricaded behind logic and contracts. He had convinced himself that isolation was strength, that people were risks to be calculated, not souls to be understood, that trust was a weakness, and kindness an open door to exploitation. But Camilla had walked into that open safe and, without touching a thing, tore down every one of his defenses. He didn't see a thief in her anymore. He saw a mother, stretched thin but unbending, a daughter, still clinging to hope as her own mother faded, a woman who had chosen integrity, even when the world had given her every reason not to, and it broke him in a way he didn't know he could break. Alexander skipped his morning conference call. Instead, he walked the halls like a restless ghost, pausing by the study door where the test had unfolded. The safe stood sealed now, heavy and silent like it knew his shame. He touched its cold steel and recoiled like it burned. This wasn't just about Camilla. It was about him. He had turned his life into a fortress, but what good was a fortress if it kept love out as well as betrayal? He thought of the years he had wasted guarding his wealth while his soul hollowed out inside him. He thought of the empty holidays, the meaningless parties, the people who stayed close only to circle his fortune like vultures. And then he thought of Camilla, who had every reason to take from him and yet gave him something none of them had, proof that goodness could still exist. For the first time in years, Alexander felt ashamed to be rich. Around noon, he opened his laptop and began searching. He found her employee file. 7 months of perfect attendance, never late, never absent. Salary, painfully small. Emergency contact, her mother. Medical notes, no benefits claimed. No health insurance. No retirement plan. Nothing but survival. His throat tightened. What would her life be like if she had just taken one bundle from that safe? One bundle would have been enough to buy her mother's medicine, pay her daughter's school fees, secure a home. And yet she had walked away from it. Why? Because she believed doing the right thing mattered even when no one was watching. Even when it cost her everything. Alexander sat back in his chair and let out a shaky laugh. It sounded half like a sob. For a man who had spent his whole life measuring people by what they took, Camilla had measured herself by what she refused to. He made a decision then. No contracts, no conditions, no games. If the world had any justice left in it, Camilla deserved to know peace, not just survival. And maybe, just maybe, if he gave her that, he might finally feel human again. Alexander closed the laptop, stood and walked toward his writing desk. He picked up a heavy pen and pulled a sheet of his personal stationery toward him. And then, for the first time in decades, he began to write something from the heart. The mansion was silent when Camilla arrived the next morning. She parked her battered hatchback in its usual corner, tightened her bun in the rearview mirror and walked up the stone steps, bracing herself for another long day. The air was crisp, her breath forming soft clouds as she unlocked the side entrance with her worn keycard. She didn't notice the letter at first. It lay on the kitchen counter, centered perfectly on the cool marble, her name written in bold, elegant script across the front, Camilla. The handwriting was unmistakable, clean, deliberate, heavy. Alexander Ashworth. Her stomach dropped. For a fleeting second, panic surged. Had she done something wrong? Had someone accused her of something? The memory of the open safe flashed in her mind like a spark. Had it been a trap? Did he know she had seen it? Would he think she had? Her hands trembled as she reached for the envelope. Inside, on thick cream paper, were only a few lines. Camilla, integrity is priceless, but so is peace. You've given me both. Your daughters and your mother deserve a life without fear. Please accept the enclosed without guilt. It's not a reward. It's a thank you. Alexander Ashworth. Attached beneath the letter was a check. Blank. Signed. Camilla's breath caught in her throat. Her vision blurred instantly, tears welling before she could stop them. She sank into the nearest chair, clutching the letter to her chest like a lifeline. For a long time, she didn't move. The kitchen ticked with the sound of the antique wall clock. The house was so large, so quiet, and here she was, a maid holding a blank check that could erase years of struggle. Her mind flooded. Her mother's thin face in the hospital bed, whispering apologies for being a burden. The constant phone calls from the school about unpaid tuition. The eviction notice folded in the bottom of her purse like a threat she tried to forget. It could all end, and not because she had begged, not because she had stolen, but because she had chosen to do the right thing when no one was watching. Her tears slipped silently down her cheeks as she stared at the signature, bold and certain, like a door flung open where only walls had been. Camilla folded the letter carefully, as though it might shatter, and slid it back into the envelope. Then she pressed both hands to her face and sobbed, not with despair this time, but with a release so raw it left her shaking. When she finally composed herself, she noticed something else on the counter. A second envelope, smaller, labeled simply, "For your daughters." Inside were 2 scholarship applications, already filled out with their names, and a note from Alexander saying he had contacted the school personally. Their tuition would be covered. Completely. Camilla covered her mouth, a strangled sound escaping. She had spent so long carrying the weight of survival alone that she had forgotten what it felt like when someone simply helped. In that quiet kitchen, the world shifted. Her heart, long armored by necessity, cracked open just enough to let hope in. She looked around the vast, gleaming kitchen. The marble, the gold, the cold, and for the first time it didn't intimidate her. It felt safe. Not because of its wealth, but because for the first time, she realized there was kindness inside its walls. And somewhere upstairs, Alexander Ashworth stood at the top of the grand staircase, hidden from sight, watching her shoulders shake as she read his words. His throat tightened. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. Saturday afternoon arrived wrapped in sunlight, soft and golden. Camilla stood at her kitchen counter peeling potatoes when she heard the knock at the door. It startled her. She rarely had visitors and never unannounced. Her daughters, Sophia and Lucia, were sprawled on the floor coloring with broken crayons, their laughter bright and fleeting like sparrows. Camilla wiped her hands on a dish towel and opened the door, and froze. Alexander Ashworth stood on her worn porch, dressed not in his usual tailored suit but in a simple button-down shirt and rolled sleeves. No tie, no polished arrogance. He looked almost human. His tall frame seemed smaller somehow, like the walls around him had finally cracked. In his hands he held a folder thick with papers. "Good afternoon, Camilla," he said softly, almost awkwardly. "Mr. Ashworth," she breathed, stunned. "What? How?" "I thought it was time I saw where real strength lives," he replied gently. For a heartbeat, they just looked at each other, 2 people from opposite worlds, separated by nothing more than a thin wooden threshold. Then she stepped aside. "Please, come in." Alexander entered her small home like someone stepping into sacred space. The air smelled of onions and warm bread. The living room was cramped, furniture mismatched, walls lined with school drawings and fading photographs. It felt alive in a way his mansion never had. Sophia and Lucia peeked from behind the couch, wide-eyed. "Girls," Camilla said softly, "this is my boss." Alexander crouched down to their level, a smile ghosting across his usually severe face. "Hello, ladies. I've heard you're both very clever." Lucia giggled. Sophia blushed. For the next half hour, Alexander sat at their chipped kitchen table, sipping weak coffee from a cracked mug as the girls chattered about school and art projects. Camilla stood in the doorway, arms crossed, trying to steady the swirl of disbelief in her chest. Eventually, the girls scampered outside to play, and Alexander placed the folder on the table between them. "These are documents," he began, "to help you purchase a home. Somewhere safer, closer to good schools. The deed can be in your name alone. No conditions, no strings," Camilla blinked rapidly. I don't understand." "You don't have to," he said. "Just accept it. You've given more to this house than I ever asked, and you did it with grace. Let me give something back." Her throat constricted. She opened the folder with trembling hands. Mortgage pre-approvals. A down payment already transferred to escrow. Legal contacts. Even a list of neighborhoods with playgrounds and medical clinics nearby. "This is too much," she whispered. "No," Alexander said quietly. "This is just enough." He hesitated, then added, "I'd also like to offer you a new position. Head of domestic operations, full benefits, flexible schedule. Enough to give your family the life they deserve, without sacrificing your own." Camilla stared at him, speechless. Tears shimmered at the edge of her lashes. Why are you doing this?" Alexander met her gaze, and for the first time his eyes weren't cold or guarded. They were tired and honest. "Because you reminded me what humanity looks like," he said, "and I don't want to be the kind of man who forgets it again." The room seemed to grow impossibly still. Camilla's voice cracked. "Thank you. I don't have words." "You don't need words," Alexander murmured. "Just say yes." Camilla nodded, her hand covering her mouth as tears spilled freely. "Yes." And in that small sunlit kitchen, surrounded by peeling paint and laughter echoing from the yard, something shifted. A fortress crumbled and a family's future was born. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of life changed, not with fireworks or headlines, but in soft, invisible ways that only the heart could measure. Camilla's new home stood on a quiet, tree-lined street where the wind smelled of cut grass and hope. The first night they slept there, her daughters danced barefoot on the empty wooden floors, their laughter echoing like bells. Her mother moved into the sunny downstairs bedroom, where she could sit by the window and knit while watching the girls play in the yard. For the first time in years, the air in their lives was free of fear, and Alexander Ashworth kept visiting, never unannounced, never for long, just enough to check in, to bring Sophia new art supplies or Lucia a soccer ball, to share coffee at Camilla's worn kitchen table as her daughters clambered over his lap without hesitation. He didn't come as a billionaire anymore. He came as something rarer, a friend. At the mansion, Camilla's new role as head of domestic operations reshaped the entire household. She hired and trained staff, set fair schedules, and introduced small kindnesses into a place once suffocated by silence. The other workers adored her. Even the marble halls seemed lighter now, as though the house itself was breathing again. Alexander watched this transformation quietly from the edges, no longer the suspicious predator he had once been, but a man learning to trust what he could not measure on a balance sheet. One evening, after the staff had gone home, he found Camilla standing in the study where it had all begun. The safe sat locked and silent, the same steel door that had once symbolized everything he thought mattered. She was dusting the bookshelves, humming softly. "Do you ever think about that day?" he asked quietly. Camilla turned, startled, then smiled faintly. "Every day. It changed everything." "It changed me," Alexander admitted. "I thought wealth made me strong. I thought suspicion kept me safe. But I was just alone." Her eyes softened. "You're not alone anymore." For a long moment they stood in silence, surrounded by the quiet tick of the old clock and the fading glow of sunset spilling through the windows. "Do you know what still haunts me?" Alexander said finally. "That I almost missed it. I almost missed seeing who you really are because I was too busy trying to catch you failing." Camilla placed her duster down gently. "Sometimes," she said, "we build walls so high to keep pain out, that we trap ourselves inside with it." Alexander's throat tightened. He nodded, unable to speak. Camilla stepped closer, her voice soft but steady. "You didn't give me that house or this job because I passed your test. You gave them to me because you finally saw something good and chose to believe in it. And that," she added, "takes more courage than any vault can hold." Her words struck deeper than he expected. For the first time in years, Alexander felt something heavy slipping off his shoulders. The armor of suspicion, the constant dread of betrayal. He realized he had been rich for a long time. But only now was he becoming wealthy in the ways that mattered, Not with money, with trust, with peace, with family, even if not by blood. That night, as he drove away from her little house, he saw the lights glowing in her windows, laughter spilling out like music. And for the first time in his life, Alexander Ashworth smiled and whispered to himself, "I'm finally home."